Right, we are loading.
Hello.
Great. Why don't we go ahead and begin then? The first item of business is the adoption of the minutes for the last meeting, for the September 10th meeting. Could I get a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Everyone's had a chance to read them. And a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are adopted as written. I would like to add two calendar reminders at this point. First is that the next meeting, October 5th, is from 10 to 12. We changed from the normal 2 to 4 to accommodate the public in terms of its engagement with the legislative advisory meeting, committee meeting. We don't want to put our public in a conflict of being here or before the redistricting committee. So that will take place, that one change, and then we drop back to the normal 2 to 4 thereafter. Also on the calendar, please note that notwithstanding our overall goal of having a scheduled meeting every other Tuesday, there is no meeting on Tuesday, November the 2nd. That one will be on November 9th instead, and we'll move right into every 2 weeks thereafter. The change is for two reasons. One is to be sensitive to the public, the municipal elections that are going on that day, and there might be inconvenience for some people. And secondly, some of our legislative leaders may be participating in part of the National Conference of State Legislators. So for that reason, we've bumped up a week there. Does anyone have any comments on those two changes or any other calendar issues? Okay, seeing none, then we'll go into the overview for the meeting today. We're going to hear from two panels. One is the state agency panel, and I'll introduce just a second, but DNR Secretary Hadaway Riccio will lead that discussion. And then we'll have the federal local government panel after that. I would like to remind panelists that each panel is slated for 30 minutes, which allows for some question and answer after each panel finishes its remarks. So if we could go ahead and start, I'll ask Secretary Jeannie Hadaway Riccio, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that before, to go ahead and introduce the panel that she's with as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Governor and members of the Commission, for the opportunity to present today. And we also thank you for your interest in our parks and our green spaces and outdoor recreation. Andrew, would you prefer that we share our PowerPoint? Okay, great.
It should be shared. Thank you. We'll advance. Great. Please advise when to advance.
Sure. Well, if you want to take us to the next slide, and then the next slide, we can go ahead and begin. So we wanted to start by just talking about our overall work at the Department of Natural Resources around parks and outdoor recreation, and the fact that that work is really based on many guiding principles, including stewardship of our natural, cultural, and historical resources, and also inspiring future stewards of those resources. We're also guided by the principle of access for all. And by that, we mean from a geographic location standpoint, from a diversity standpoint, a socioeconomic standpoint, and also with an eye toward accommodations for our customers with disabilities. And then speaking of our customers, another really important guiding principle is, of course, customer satisfaction. And we really pride ourselves on that. And our team at DNR is one of our greatest assets when it comes to customer service, as well as the quality of our parks. All of this work is guided by a state framework called the Land Preservation and Recreation Plan. And also each of the local jurisdictions that want to be eligible for program open space local side funds have a land preservation, parks, and recreation plan as their guiding framework. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to take the time to explain that outdoor recreation does happen in our state parks, but we have many other forms of public lands that are state-owned throughout our system. And even within state parks, we have different types of state lands. So these are just some of the examples of those. And all told, we have over 550,000 acres of public lands in our state system. Next slide, please. So looking at the variety of the types of public lands, we also should look at the variety of things that those lands offer, including amenities and landscapes. And many of you are familiar with this because you are strong supporters and visitors of our parks and open space. But we really have a variety of amenities, whether it's horseback riding, biking, hiking, hunting, fishing. We also have a variety of landscapes, everything from the mountains to the beaches, wetlands, and everything in between. And then we also offer a number of world-class opportunities and world-class outdoor recreation opportunities at our facilities, including the 5-star, which will be hosted at Bear Hill in October, and also the USA Cycling Mountain Bike Marathon Championships, which will be hosted by Maryland at Gambrel State Park. Our public lands also offer an amazing opportunity for outreach and learning and education. In fact, last year, even with the pandemic, our department found a way to reach over 22,000 youth with environmental education opportunities through a combination of in-person and virtual. And last but not least, public lands offer a great chance for workforce training, which Nita Satina will describe in greater detail later. And then going to the next slide, please. We wanted to just also talk about what planning looks like for the future, because that's why we're all here, right? So in keeping with our LPRP framework, the strategies that we are deploying and will continue to deploy include adding to existing state parks and state lands, adding new state parks and lands, continuing our work with local jurisdictions to add parks, also continuing to expand accessibility and expand our partnerships so that we can offer more amenities and more opportunities to our customers. And last but not least, we'll talk about this in greater detail later in the presentation as well, but using planning tools so that we're making wise decisions for the future, such as the park equity tool. And you can see through the pictures here, the first one is the ribbon cutting for Wolfden Run, one of our new state parks. The second picture is of the accessible boating group located right here in Annapolis. And the third picture is of our partnership with Talbot County on the Frederick Douglass Park. These are all great examples of how we are planning for the future. You'll also see and hear today that outdoor recreation and our parks is more than just an activity and a focus that happens in the Maryland Park Service. It is really across all of our units. It is something that our entire department is dedicated to and working on together. So you'll notice from the presentations that we have several units from DNR represented today, including Chesapeake and Coastal Service and our Land Acquisition and Planning Unit. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nita Satina, our Superintendent of the Maryland Park Service.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. It is my honor to serve as the Superintendent of the Maryland Park Service, and I greatly appreciate this opportunity to talk about our mission with you. Next slide, please. The Maryland Park Service prides itself in providing superior customer service. It is an award-winning park system that we can all be proud of. The Maryland Park Service was a top 4 finalist for the National Gold Medal Award, for example. Per this chart, 87% of our visitors consistently rate their experience in state parks excellent or above average in our customer satisfaction surveys. And we receive hundreds of survey comments like this one on the right that speak to the quality of public service provided by our dedicated employees. Next slide, please. State parks fill an important niche in Maryland's parks and recreation portfolio, conserving the biological diversity of Maryland's most treasured natural landscapes and providing outdoor recreation opportunities that connect people to nature. We are also the single largest owner of some of Maryland's most important historic and cultural sites. And a core part of our mission is teaching people about Maryland's rich natural and historical resources and inspiring stewardship actions to conserve what makes Maryland such a beautiful place to live. In these ways, state parks are an important investment in the health and well-being of people. And I know many of us have certainly gained a new appreciation for that during this pandemic. Next slide, please. Our workforce is our most important asset to achieving our public service mission. This is a photo of our 2020 Ranger School graduates. They are part of a proud and dedicated workforce of park professionals who have kept the state parks open throughout the pandemic. We have 113 park rangers, 60 maintenance personnel, 26 administrative staff, 22 park managers, and 6 planners. And we support our workforce with a robust year-round training program, and we launched a new mentoring program to further support their professional development. Next slide, please. Our permanent workforce is supported by long-term contractual employees and hundreds of seasonal employees, especially during the spring and summer months. And as you can see there, they fill a number of important roles in our operations. This is a photo of our lifeguards who competed in our annual lifeguard competition. These young people do a fantastic job keeping our visitors safe on our many popular beaches. The increase in the minimum wage announced by the governor in July will strengthen our ability to recruit and retain these valued employees. Next slide, please. So state parks are like national parks in many ways, but closer to home. We provide nature-based outdoor recreation in a family-friendly atmosphere, minimizing the sights and sounds of civilization to ensure that nature can be experienced and enjoyed in all its wonder and beauty. In this way, state parks largely complement local and regional park systems, which typically have more developed recreation amenities. Connecting with nature is an essential experience in state parks that every Marylander should have access to and is part of our state's outdoor recreation heritage. Next slide, please. So trails are the gateway to nature and healthy outdoor exercise in state parks. From woodland trails to improved rail trails, surveys consistently rate trails as our #1 most popular park amenity. I'm not sure where this was taken, but it could be Patuxent, and I don't know, maybe that's Delegate Lukey on a mountain bike. It could be. Next slide, please. Our 272 campsites and cabins are extremely popular. Full service cabins like this one at Harrington Manor State Park are popular year-round and are beloved by generations of families for whom these getaways provide an affordable family vacation. We're consistently looking for opportunities to acquire land to expand our overnight accommodations. Most recently, we acquired 182 acres adjacent to Sang Run State Park on the Youghiogheny River and are planning to construct campsites there in the future. Next slide, please. As managers of over 141,000 acres of state park land, we are responsible for the conservation of our natural resources to preserve biological diversity from threats of invasive flora and fauna and climate change. We also undertake restoration projects to restore hundreds of acres of pollinator meadows, forests, wetlands, streams, rivers, shorelines, and we do this in partnership with many agencies. Deer management is one of our critical parts of our biodiversity conservation through recreational hunting to protect our forests and sensitive species from overbrowse. Next slide, please. This is a picture of really amazing habitat restoration project we've undertaken at Sassafras NRMA. Over 1,000 acres of new pollinator meadows across the state have been restored, including this one, which also included 20,000 trees planted along the river. We work closely with allied units in DNR, such as the Chesapeake and Coastal Service, to support these projects. This project was done also in partnership with Washington College and has attracted quail and ground nesting birds like this grasshopper sparrow. Next slide, please. Many don't realize that Maryland Park Service is the single largest owner of historic sites in the state. Our historic preservation work is supported by partnerships, as you see there, MHT, MHAA, the Department of Transportation, SHA's archaeological program, and nonprofit organizations. And featured on this slide are photos of current work at the historic Howard farmstead nested within Patuxent River State Park, which tells the story of the Howard family who purchased their freedom from slavery and became successful farmers and the original publishers of the Afro-American newspaper. This photo shows our clearing vegetation away from the original farmhouse and the SHA's chief archaeologist who is working at the site and finding a lot of artifacts. This phase of the project was funded by the Maryland Historic Trust African American Preservation Grant and generous support from the General Assembly. Thanks to all of you, Senator Zucker in particular, and Delegate Lupke and the District 14 representatives, who some of which were able to come visit us at this site. Next slide, please. The Maryland Park Service is honored to preserve and interpret the story of Harriet Tubman and her work as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. It is a difficult history of suffering and injustice, but it is also a story of transcendence and inspiration. New in 2021 is an increased focus on interpreting difficult histories, which means working with parks to identify underrepresented stories. For example, we recently celebrated the anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. And we celebrated that at Sang Run State Park. Thank you, Senator Edwards, for joining us. And our work to tell these stories is a commitment to authentic historical interpretation that is diverse and inclusive, reaching the broadest audience of visitors that we welcome to state parks. Next slide, please. So the foundation of why I personally wanted to work in conservation was formed when I was a child through exposure to a local park that was adjacent to the apartment building, so within easy walking distance where I grew up. And my first nature mentor was my mother, who introduced me to the wonder and awe of nature. And that is the essential role of the state park ranger, and a foundation of our core mission, which is to inspire the stewardship of our natural world. And we do this through nature centers, interpretive programs, environmental education with schools, and many special events that reach, as the Secretary mentioned, over 200,000 visitors a year. Our interpretive theme for 2021 was focused on a Leave No Trace campaign to encourage our visitors to practice outdoor ethics. And as you know, Lieutenant Governor Rutherford is visiting all of the state parks, and he is pictured here with me under our masks, Smokey Bear and Secretary Hadaway Riccio at the Soldier's Delight Natural Environment Area to proclaim State Parks Week this past April. And we are standing in front of a new mobile visitor center, which is staffed by bilingual rangers and was paid for by our very own friends of Patapsco Valley State Park. Next slide, please. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps planted millions of trees, and built many of the nation's parks, including many of Maryland's state parks and forests. Well, that tradition continues today through 3 modern-day Conservation Corps programs operated by the Maryland Park Service. The Conservation Jobs Corps, what we call CJC, employs 13 to 17-year-olds. The Maryland Conservation Corps, employing 18 to 25-year-olds, is an AmeriCorps-funded program. And our newer Veterans Conservation Corps, which of course employs our military veterans. Next slide, please. The program goals are similar to the original CCC to support the conservation and maintenance of the parks while enriching the lives of the Corps members, providing job training and outdoor adventures. And pre-COVID, the state parks were the single largest summer employer of the Baltimore Youth Works, employing 200 young people from Baltimore City each summer in the CJC, providing jobs, transportation, uniforms, and meals. We also employ youth through county workforce development and social service agencies. This photo is of our annual graduation at North Point State Park of over 300 CJC Corps members who worked in their state parks and did fantastic improvements and also enjoyed camping and fishing and paddling and all kinds of outdoor adventures. Next slide, please. So ensuring equitable access to state parks is a core focus of our public service mission. State parks are for all people, and all people should be made to feel welcome in state parks that belong to them. And one way we strive to ensure equitable access is by maintaining the affordability of our state parks. We do not charge youth groups to camp in our state parks. We offer senior citizens a $10 lifetime pass. And we have not raised our park fees since 2012. We also invest in improving and maintaining our waterfront parks, which we know serve a diverse visitor population and who enjoy access to the bay with their family and friends. And we provide outreach programs like SPI Park and provide bilingual rangers who welcome our Latino visitors. Here they are pictured with Smokey the Bear at Sandy Point State Park. And we invest in universal design improvements to ensure ADA access, including grant funding support from the Governor's Access Maryland program through the Department of Disabilities. I know the Commission is also interested in transit access and walkability to state parks, and admittedly, this can be a challenge given their locations in largely rural areas. However, Greenway trails have opportunities to connect state parks for biking and walking access, like the Greenway Trail being planned by the Baltimore Metropolitan Council to connect Patapsco Valley State Park to Baltimore City. Of course, the array of local and regional and national parks in Maryland are also award-winning and sometimes closest to home and are important recreational resources to meet our park equity goals. Next slide, please. This is just to give you a snapshot of some improvements we have underway at Maryland's signature state park on the Chesapeake Bay. We have renovated the park boat launches, remodeled the Central Park Plaza with plantings, constructed a Chesapeake Bay themed playground, and have many other improvements planned with a lot of support from the National Park Service and other units in DNR. These improvements will give our 1.5 million visitors to Sandy Point State Park a world-class experience on the Chesapeake Bay. Next slide, please. The impacts of severe weather fueled by climate change have significantly damaged state park infrastructure in some cases. Pictured here is just one example of flood damage on a popular gristmill trail in Patapsco Valley State Park below Ellicott City. Our response to climate change is multifold, improving our landscape resiliency to better handle storm events through the list that you see on the slide. Number 2, avoiding building improvements in climate change forecasted flood zones, of course. And third, to do our part to reduce our carbon footprint by planting trees and reducing our carbon-based energy use. Next slide, please. This is a picture of one example highlighting a major solar installation at Sandy Point State Park, which generates 46% of the park's energy needs. And we have signed a new exciting agreement with the Maryland Energy Administration to install solar arrays in more state parks. Next slide, please. According to a 2010 economic impact study, Maryland state parks generate a $65 million economic impact annually. The value of the outdoor industry to tourism, manufacturing, and the retail and service economy has been recognized nationally. And to attract those businesses and retain them in Maryland, Governor Hogan formed the Maryland Outdoor Recreation Economic Commission. And the commission put forth recommendations to continue investments in Maryland's public lands and wealth of natural resources. One example of recent investments that will benefit Maryland's outdoor recreation economy is illustrated at Fair Hill. Maryland's Horse Industry Board put forth recommendations to strengthen Maryland's equestrian industry, including improvements needed at the historic Fair Hill Natural Resource Management Area turf track to improve safety and attract high caliber equestrian events. And as a result of these investments at this unique 5,600 acre state park, Maryland was selected to host a 5-star equestrian competition next month, just one of only 7 of its kind worldwide, and which will host the United States Olympic team and attract visitors from around the country. We have over 30 affiliated partner organizations that raise money and host events like this one, volunteer, lease areas, and support their state parks. Next slide, please. So this is a complex slide, but what it illustrates is the historic visitation levels that we have certainly been challenged by. And this is 10 years of state park closures. You can see we keep a detailed record. Pre-COVID, visitation trends were rising pretty much every year on an average of 10 to 15% until COVID-19 brought about a 45% increase of 21.5 million visitors compared to 14.9 million in 2019. That resulted in a record 292 capacity closures, which means we are turning visitors away upon their arrival. The 14 parks in this chart that fill to capacity have several common denominators, primarily access for wading and swimming in water and trails. In 2021, the trend has continued. So far, we have had 169 capacity closures, which is less than 2020 year to date, but a 67% increase over pre-COVID 2019 year to date. We have served 15.2 million visitors so far in 2021, which is more than we served in the entire year of 2019. The takeaway for us then is that COVID-driven visitation will naturally decline as school classrooms have reopened, youth sports have returned, and other leisure destinations and travel reopens. However, COVID is still exacting its influence, and the new visitors that discovered their state parks during the pandemic are still returning. Next slide, please. To meet the growing demand for outdoor recreation, we are investing in opening new state parks and improving and expanding existing state parks. And as you will hear in a moment, we are also supporting local park system improvements as well. State park acquisition and priorities include water access and new places for expanded trails, campgrounds, and cabins. Pictured here on the horizon is Wills Mountain State Park, which overlooks the beautiful city of Cumberland. And we are working on several important acquisitions here to improve access to this natural area, which includes outstanding vistas, rock climbing, and great opportunities for trail expansion, which will further support the city as an outdoor recreation destination. Next slide, please. Wolfden Run State Park opened in 2019 and represents the first off-highway vehicle state park in our system, providing 2,000 acres of ORV trails on former coal mine lands. with 3 miles of river access for fishing and other enjoyment. We are finishing an RFP to attract a private contractor to operate a new campground for this state park. And I will say that I had little experience driving an ORV until we test rode these trails, and it was admittedly very fun. Next slide, please. Bohemia River State Park on the opposite end of the state in Cecil County is on track to open later this fall. And here we are surveying the 460-acre property, which provides access to the upper Bohemia River for fishing and paddling, birding. We have already begun reforestation and meadow habitat restoration, as well as trail construction at what promises to be a new quintessential state park. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. And I will turn it over to Sandy Olick.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present the Park Equity Tool to the Commission. I can go to the next slide. This is a planning tool that was launched here at DNR in 2008, and then we recently have partnered with the University of Maryland to improve this tool. It was born out of a need through Project Green Classrooms and the Maryland Partnership for Children and Nature to kind of take a look at who had access to green space and parks, and to support planning efforts that we not only do internally here, such as the Land Preservation Recreation Plan, but also provide a tool to our local partners for the LPPRP process, comprehensive plans, and other things as such. The tool is more than just a proximity analysis. There are many layers that are taken that form a composite score. So it takes into account park access and proximity, as well as amenities of parks and social vulnerability. So it does, and you can see on this graphic, it may be kind of small and hard to see, but it does take into account walkability, transit, low income levels, density, things such as, so that gets at the social vulnerability. And it's based on the data that not only we maintain as far as the location of our state and regional parks, but the local park data that comes in through the LPPRP process. So as you can guess, we will be launching, we're in that cycle right now where the local counties are working on their LPPRPs. And then within the next year, we'll be continuing to evolve the tool, as well as when the new census data comes out, the data will be updated. We also are continuing to work with the University of Maryland on integrating this tool with other tools such as the Maryland Environmental Justice Screen and a climate and health mapper that we're developing. So we will be able to look at such issues as health outcomes, asthma rates, canopy cover, flood risk, and urban heat island. So next, please. So this is just a screen capture of the tool itself. This is a kind of a look at the composite layer. At any time, you could turn off the combined layer if you just wanted to look at proximity or just wanted to look at income levels or percent non-white, things such as percent non-white population. The data is exportable. We have done trainings through our partners with land acquisition and planning for the local partners who are working on their LPPRPs. And this is just another screen capture of the bars where you can look at the data for a particular census block group, or you could look at a group of blocks and look at the income score as compared to your own county or to the rest of the state. And then there's a series of context layers, including schools, facilities, as I mentioned, transit and walkability, because it really tells the story when you're looking at access to nature or park opportunities or green schoolyards or things such as that. So we're really excited about this tool, and we're always excited to be able to work with partners on how to use this tool. And that's all I have. I'll turn it over to Carrie, who's going to talk, I think, more about the LPPRP process.
Go to the next slide. Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the local side of Program Open Space. Program Open Space Local provides financial and technical assistance to counties and municipalities for the planning, acquisition, and/or development of recreation land or open space areas. Every year, next slide, sorry. Every year, the Department of Budget and Management allocates POS local funds to every county in Baltimore City based on formula. In FY22, POS local funds totaled $53.3 million. Next slide. Projects funded through POS local are determined by local jurisdictions and are subject to the approval by the Board of Public Works. The LPPRP, Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan, help guide local jurisdictions in identifying their park needs. Plans must be updated by each county in Baltimore City every 5 years. Jurisdictions must also submit a POS local annual program, which includes proposed acquisition, development, and planning projects. In FY 2021, the Board of Public Works approved $65.8 million for 175 POS local grants to the local jurisdictions in Maryland. Next slide, please. In 2019 and 2020, a total of $540,000 in POS local funding was used to make improvement to the existing fields, dugouts, and bleachers on Field 7.5 in Wacomico County. It was also used to replace 8 outdated playground equipment and safety surfacing. Field 7.5 is used by the Little League Challenger program, which is an adaptive baseball program for individuals with physical and intellectual challenges. The league aims to provide an opportunity for individuals to participate in a Little League environment that is structured to their abilities. Next slide. In 2018, $2.5 million in POS funding was approved at Blandare Regional Park in Howard County for an inclusive playground. This fully fenced playground provides a universal design to encourage children of all ability levels to play together. Next slide. Community Parks and Playgrounds is a program that was first funded in FY 2002 and provides flexible grants to municipal governments to respond to the unmet need for assistance to rehabilitate, expand, or improve existing parks, create new parks, or to purchase and install playground equipment. In FY21, the Board of Public Works approved $2.6 million for 20 community parks and playgrounds projects. Next slide. In both 2020 and 2021, the BPW approved a total of $373,000 in CP&P funding for the town of Mount Airy to purchase and install a universal design ADA compliant inclusive playground and pavilion at Watkins Park in Carroll County. So this is actually Carroll County's first inclusive playground. Next slide. In addition to Baltimore City's POS local allocation, the city also receives Baltimore City or direct grant funding, $6 million per year from the state share of POS local funds. Projects funded through the Baltimore City direct grant are determined by the city or specific budget language. These projects do not require matching funds and can be used for operations, acquisition, or park development. Next slide. An example of a direct grant project along with POS funding and in partnership with the Maryland Park Service is Cahill Recreation Center at Gwen Falls and Leakin Park. This was $6 million in Baltimore City direct grant and over $3 million in local POS funding that was used to construct an indoor-outdoor recreation and education center in the city that is used both for both program indoor and outdoor. And again, this was in partnership with the Maryland Park Service. So those were a few examples of local POS CP&P projects as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Chair. That concludes our presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
This wasn't one of those strategies of use all available time to avoid questions, was it, Madam Secretary?
We're just so enthusiastic about what we do. We can't help ourselves.
Well, I must confess a little bit. I found some of it interesting enough that I did not jump in a little bit earlier and ask to watch the clock. But I do want to turn to our panel and see whether some of the legislative colleagues have a question or comment or two. Delegate Ludke, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, and all of your staff. So let me start with a big picture question. Prior to the Great Recession, there was one of many reports that was put out about the parks, and it did something really interesting. It laid out options for policymakers, including the legislature, for what type of investments would be necessary to make the parks even better than they are. And one of those options presented was the option of making Maryland state parks a sort of national model state park system. And of course, those investments were never made because the Great Recession hit and the state didn't have the funding. But if we were to ask that same question today, what additional investment would be necessary by the state to really create a national model state park system? Do we have a sense of what that investment would be?
So I think that's all part of our planning process, and the LPRP that we described, we put together every 5 years. In addition, we also have a long-range capital budget program that we work with the governor and the Department of Budget and Management, of course, the legislature on. With regards to the national program that I believe you're referencing from the report, we came in the top 4 for that, even with the resources and the assets that we have now. So Amita, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that process and our ranking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can, work with the commission on your question. Every year, as the secretary just said, we put forward our vision for what our needs are from an operating budget standpoint, critical maintenance budget, capital budget, and we forecast that out typically 5 years on the park improvement side of things. And we also have, we have new parks in the pipeline that are at some stage of the acquisition process. And those are factored into our operating budget requests as well. So it's a bit of a moving target, but it is part of a broader planning process. I don't think that there's sort of one answer to your question. I think that, we try to keep the state parks natural, not overdeveloped, which keeps our costs consequently low, frankly, lower than they would be otherwise. And, we have our core, as long as our core mission is being met, that is the goals that we set for the resources that we need.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the answer. And I appreciate the fact that I put you on the spot a little bit with that question. I think we all appreciate the work that DNR and the Park Service are doing. I think we all recognize that there are a lot of stresses on the parks and that we have not invested in the parks the way we need to. I think that's a given. And I don't ascribe that to this administration. I ascribe that to, the legislature and everyone else involved over the last couple of decades. But let me ask about one specific component of that, because despite the massive increase in visitorship we've seen over the last couple decades and the last few years in particular in the state parks, staffing, the permanent staffing in the parks has stayed largely the same. And, that I think probably has put a lot of stress on the workforce in the parks and what the parks are able to provide. So a two-part question. One, is there any process, data-driven process for analysis of what the staffing needs are in the parks? For example, is it driven by attendance numbers? What drives it? And two, is there a plan to increase the park staffing given the significant increase we've seen in visitorship?
So staffing levels can vary depending on the type of public lands that we're talking about. Going back to that list that I showed, we have some public lands that are very intensive use, high outdoor recreation areas. We have other lands that are more targeted toward ecological conservation and more passive recreation. So it really depends on the project itself. But that is definitely something that we're working through as we prepare our FY23 budget. And we would be happy to work with the commission on that as we get more information together on that. I would also say that I think this really underscores the importance of program open space. And we are, of course, very grateful for the legislature's support. But clearly there's demand for open space. And without that program, we would not be able to do what we're doing today. So continued support for that would be greatly appreciated.
Madam Secretary, let me just suggest in support of the questions that Doug Lutke has raised, I think it's important that the commission see those proposals on the staffing level. I know you're going to go through the legislative process and the budgetary process, but we will be inputting in the same overall arena. And so it'd be helpful, I think, if we knew which direction you were going. And I'll ask our staff to coordinate that with you. So I see also the order that they came up. Delegate Boyce is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for the presentation. I have a couple of questions, and they somewhat piggyback off of Delegate Lukey's. You mentioned the park capacity limits and how you have been monitoring them for probably the last, I think you said 10 years. And then even so now, because of COVID and the increase of use, I wanted to get a little bit more information. You said that there was a demand for access for swimming and wading and trails. But then I heard you also say that you expect a decline, hopefully, because folks are somewhat back to some normalcy given COVID. So I have a couple of questions in that, are you expecting not to make any changes, especially as it relates to accessibility, because you're assuming that the usage is going to go down?
So when we developed or renewed and updated the LPRP most recently, we were anticipating increased visitation, and that was even before the pandemic came along. So I think the point that we were trying to make is that last year was definitely an anomaly, but right now we're on track to exceed our numbers from 2019. As part of that LPRP process, we do an extensive amount of stakeholder outreach, including surveys, focus groups, and meetings with stakeholders. And that's how we determined which amenities were highest on everyone's preference list. So Nita, do you want to talk about how trails, for example, ranked #1 at the top of the list, and water access is obviously an important one?
Yeah, so the LPRP and also another survey that we did with Goucher College identified trails as a top amenity. And we see that in the state parks that are filling to capacity, and certainly seasonally access to water for swimming and wading. That popularity has been growing over more than the past decade. We do not see the trend in those amenities declining. They continue to be our most popular draw. And so our investment in providing access to those experiences is a priority and will continue to be a priority.
Thank you. And again, I guess I'm just a little concerned. You say you've been following this for 10 years. So given that you've been following all of this for 10 years, given what you know, can you say a percentage of what you've actually worked to implement, given what you know about the increase of the use of parks? Because I'm hearing a lot of data, but I don't really think I'm hearing what has actually been done. And then going back to Delegate Lukey's point of staffing, we're going to open up new parks. So it would really be helpful to know, especially as we talk about equity and access, you know, what does that actually look like per park type, for instance? You know, the wading and the swimming and the trail parks look like X amount of staff versus the nature conservatories look like one, you know. So I'm just having a hard time of understanding. It sounds like we know we've had a need for a long time. I'm trying to figure out what we've actually done to date, and then what we're going to do to date, considering we're going to be opening and expanding parks, more parks.
Sure, so we can certainly follow up with you offline as well, but just to sort of reiterate, some of our strategies have been adding to our existing parks, so there's more space within those parks. We're also adding new parks to the system, but another really key strategy for us is working with the local jurisdictions to help them do additional acquisitions and offer additional amenities and improvements at their parks as well. So it's really a all hands on deck sort of whole systems approach. And we work with the local jurisdictions as they develop their planning documents and their planning framework to try to meet that demand and meet those needs, and be responsive to new and exciting and emerging things. For example, we have been spending a lot of time talking about pickleball at the Board of Public Works. Many years ago, no one knew what that was, but now it has grown in such popularity that we have a lot of local parks asking to transition their courts over to that to be responsive to the needs of locals and their customers. So I hope that helps to answer your question in part, but it's really just creating more opportunities and enhancing those amenities that I think will help us meet that demand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. We're running we're short of time here, so let me ask if we could next have our two senators. And I see one other hand up from Delegate Patterson. We'll handle these three here, and then I'd ask anyone beyond that if we could submit in writing and additional questions. In fact, I have several that I'll mention, but not look for an answer myself at this time, and get it back in writing before the next meeting. Senator Edwards, I think you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine sort of relate to what's been talked about, but I know we have a lot of parks. I don't know where they're all at. I don't know the names of all of them. But I think in order for us to make some kind of a good direction here, we need to know some more specifics. So the question I'm going to ask is some you can respond to, not today, but get us the information. Like, how many of these parks provide camping? And if they provide camping, what kind of camping? Because there's several different types. Which parks provide cabins? Which parks have beaches? And do we provide lifeguards or not at all the beaches at the state parks? And someone mentioned that there's only one ORV trail park in the state. I think that's not quite right. I believe there's two. There's Wolfden and the St. John's Rock, which is on the border of Allegheny and Garrett County. And Madam Secretary, as you know, there's a big push to provide more of those kind of parks for ORV kind of trails throughout the state, actually. So if you could get that information to us, I think it would be helpful as we look to see what kind of spread and where most of these things are located. It would be helpful to me anyway. I don't know about anybody else, but that's something you get to us maybe by the next meeting or sometime around there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Elfers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and to your wonderful team. Similarly, I'm happy to ask a question, and then if you could get us an answer in writing. I'll just use a park in my district as an example here, but Franklin Point State Park, and I know, Madam Secretary, you're familiar with this park, but it's a very underutilized, underinvested in park that I think has greater potential than we've, frankly, collectively as a government given it. And I have a letter that you sent us back in December about making certain investments. I had gotten a very angry email from a constituent this last weekend about those investments not having yet been made. by September. And I appreciate, we don't want to make those investments necessarily in the busy season, but it got me thinking about what is the overall plan for maintenance. What's the planning process to invest in new amenities in current state parks? Is this kind of done on an ad hoc basis, or is it data driven? What level of public or community input is sought or in that process? So I can put this in writing, Mr. Chair, but I really do want to hone in on the state parks that we currently have and how we are investing in those amenities.
Thank you. Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a very quick question, but I share some of the same concerns that has thus been identified. But I want to go back to, and I don't know how you go back to these slides because my slides did not have numbers on them, but it was probably number slide somewhere around 5, 6, or 7 that talks a bit about your graduate program. I guess it's those who are in leadership roles. Could you go back to that slide, please?
I will be pulling that slide up in a second as soon as I figure out what I've done with it. It's here somewhere. Let's see. In terms of the slide, Senator Patterson, you were asking about slide 5, 6, or 7. And what was the topic again?
The topic you talked about your graduate workforce. It was a group picture that highlighted. Like,
sure. Yes, that was slide 5. I believe slide 5 is what you're referring to.
Can we show that?
Working on it.
So that is a picture from one of our Conservation Corps programs that Superintendent Zatina described. Between the 3 programs, they serve youth from age 14 through adult. And we're happy to talk more about those programs.
My specific point that I was trying to drive home is that we talked a bit about inclusion and that kind of stuff. And I'll be curious to know, how do you solicit folks to get into that program? Because from the picture that I was able to see, I didn't see any clear indication that there was any type of inclusion in it. And I just wanted to show it.
Oh. So I would have to say that our Conservation Corps programs are probably the most diverse programs that we have in the department. So perhaps we can follow up with you offline with some additional information about that. And I believe, I don't want to speak for Department of Legislative Services, but I believe they're going to provide the members with our full slide deck after the meeting. So you'll have a copy of our presentation.
Okay, I appreciate you contacting me. Perhaps I'll follow up with you because I really would like to get back to that stuff.
So Senator Patterson, the slides are now should be showing on your screen. I apologize for that. It was 5, 6, or 7. You thought?
I said it was in after she opened up. It was probably slide number 5, 6, or 7. It was no number on these slides, so I couldn't just identify the number.
Seasonal. Talking about seasonal contractual employees.
Listen, I don't want to hold up all the time. I'll just wait to hear from the secretary on that, but I am concerned about that. Okay, thank you much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Delegate, for being understanding in that. Let me ask the other commission members now, if you have a question or two, just route them through Andrew or Jeremy, and we'll go to the appropriate people and get the answers back to you as well. I would also suggest that a couple of questions were asked. Some others may have some interest in it. So perhaps there could be coordination with staff and decide which of those responses might go to the full commission as well. Let me also just very quickly, I'll just ask the question now. And again, if you could get that to me and to the members. But Madam Secretary, you talked very briefly about connectivity as being one of your programs. I assume that's connectivity between different parks and other open space and so on. I'd like to know a little bit more about that and what's planned. And then Ms. Sotina, the climate change, I think we need a little bit more information on that. And I know you didn't have enough time, but that is so important, both in mitigation and resiliency. And I would also like to know where the other parks that are planned and not just planned in the long run, but I'm gathering acquisition and construction is underway right now. You mentioned one in Cumberland, which is great. And I'd like to know where the other 3 or 4 of the most immediate coming online parks are as well. And then also, I didn't hear, other than one reference in the cultural discussion, much talk about outreach or coordination with the Hispanic community, which in a number of our counties is part of the fastest growing park users. And Obi, as you know, that's certainly true for our county, Prince George's as well. And then lastly, I was interested, Carrie, in the fact that in 2021, appropriated was a $65.5 million program open space. I would like to know also how much was actually requested versus appropriated. And what wasn't covered too much is what is the still outstanding owed to the fund balance. And I know the legislature is working on this, but we'd be very interested in when and where the rest of this money will show up. And then lastly, I would take a moment of personal privilege and say that I saw the reference a couple times to the equestrian. And I must tell you, my daughter, for 12 years, rode competitively nationwide, hunter jumper. And this is the picture that I have on my desk right now, which with deference, I must tell you, will rival any picture that you all put up, said the proud dad. But I'm glad to see that equestrian involvement as well. Madam Secretary, any last comment before we move to the next panel?
We'd just like to thank you again for the opportunity. We look forward to continuing the discussion and appreciate the interest. We look forward to following up.
Great. Thank you all very much. Let's move to our next panel. Eric, do we have Jason Dudrow?
Mr. Chair, Jason Dubois from the Maryland Department of Planning is here on the call. If you would like to request any information from him, he is available there.
Okay. Do commission members have a question of Mr. Dubois? He is the manager for the Resource Conservation Management for the department. If not, if something does come up, then feel free to submit it subsequently. Let's turn now to our local federal government panel. I'm not sure there's a agreed upon leader there. And so I will go ahead and introduce them. Scott Hancock, Executive Director of the Maryland Municipal League, who has been in that position now for over 62 years. No. Oh, that's not correct. I'm sorry. It seems like 62.
It does.
Right. And Stephen Miller, who's the affiliate president for the Maryland Association of County Park and Recreation Administrators and Directors, and he's from the Wacomico Recreation and Tourism Department. And we also have Michael Sanderson, Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Counties, who I understand might actually indicate that we are spending too much money on program open space, but we'll let him speak. And then Wendy O'Sullivan, the Superintendent of the Chesapeake Bay Office for the National Park Service. Let me also ask, as we go through these, if we could use the same general approach, and I'd ask you to be attentive to time. The last session ran a little over. It's not your fault, so, but please try to be as attentive as possible. And then we'll stop for some questions, and then you may get some subsequent questions in writing as well. And so with that, Mr. Hancock, I see that you are first.
Thank you so much, Governor, to the governor and the vice chairs of this commission, and to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm here on behalf of MML's president, who's Salisbury Mayor Jake Day, the entire MML board of directors, representing the 157 fabulous Maryland cities and towns, and the over 1.5 million Marylanders who choose to live in a Maryland city or town. I appreciate the invitation to present a municipal perspective as you consider the future for Maryland's parks. One of the highlighted goals that I picked up of this commission, and I love it, promoting healthy and prosperous communities. It's quite simply what municipalities are all about. Quality of life is certainly our mantra, and strong, vibrant state parks, and I would add county and municipal parks, are paramount to that mission. Parks are certainly a place where we recharge. It's our oasis, a place for family gatherings, a place for fun. As you are probably aware, no existing state park is located within the corporate limits of our 157 cities and towns, but most of the state parks are located adjacent to a Maryland city. And I don't think that's by happenstance. I think it's quite intentional to ensure visitors to our state parks that they are close to the many services and amenities that are available in Maryland's municipalities, including eateries, grocery stores, fuel depots, shops, churches, etc. By providing the needed services to state park visitors, the parks really provide an economic boost for our cities and towns, and subsequently an economic boost for our state. Quite simply, welcoming and inviting state parks are good business for municipalities in Maryland. At the same time, the state parks are providing a generally passive outdoor experience. As the state panel pointed out, our cities and towns, I think, really strongly complement the open spaces found in state parks with our own more active and organized parks and recreation facilities that provide that quality of life that people seek when they live in or near a city or town. Our city parks are where many of the various sports leagues and more organized sports programs exist. There's a strong demand, as many of you know, for even more field space, even more recreational opportunities. But as you can probably imagine, our funds are severely limited. Program open space, which was referred to earlier, it's a state shared program with the counties and with Baltimore City, with the funds generated from the real estate transfer tax, is generally shared with municipalities, but that's not universal for our ongoing program. So in the municipalities, city property taxes and parks fees really make up the remainder of our Parks and Recreation general funding sources. We do the very best we can to provide the services that our citizens demand with very limited resources. And I will say, the governor mentioned this, it's very hard when funds to the major designated funding source, program open space, is occasionally borrowed by the state during the economic downturns and never seem to be fully restored once the crisis is over. Just saying. As you heard from Carrie on the state panel, there is one state-funded program administered by DNR that's a municipal-only competitive grant program. It's called Parks and Playgrounds. And it provides funding for basically small capital projects, very limited funding budgeted annually. I think in our current year's budget, 2.5 was actually budgeted by the legislature. And I think the supplemental was another 2.5. So that's $5 million for all 157 municipalities. So wrapping up, as the commission is considering investments in our wonderful state parks, MML would strongly urge the commission maybe to consider thinking more holistically, taking advantage of the federal funding sources that may be available in the very near future to not only enhance our beautiful state park system, but also to support the ever demanding needs of your constituents who heavily use our municipal and county parks and recreation programs. I think the environment is ripe for Maryland to have a renewed big vision on parks. We want to be a local government partner on that as you consider the various options and proposals that you're going to hear. Please remember that your municipal government partners provide services that best serve Marylanders locally. And we look forward to an enhanced parks partnership with the state in the years to come. I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Sorry. Thank you, Scott. Let's go next to Steve Miller.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the commission, for giving me this opportunity. My name is Steve Miller. I'm the director of Wicomico County Recreation Parks and Tourism, and I'm also the affiliate president of MACPRO, which is the Recreation and Parks affiliate of MACO. Before I share the comments I was going to bring, I do want to thank members of the legislature for their continued support of program open space. It's such an important part of what we are able to do at the county and municipal level. And then also for the recent passage in last session of the LPPI, the $85 million bill, which is going to have a tremendous impact and immediate impact and a long-lasting impact. So I just wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of my colleagues to express that appreciation. My comments will be brief, but I want to focus a little bit on the local perspective of park usage and some of the challenges that we are facing on a local level, which is similar to what we heard, I think, going on in the state parks. I'll share two perspectives, one from my own county in Wicomico County, and then I'll also share a little bit of perspective from other counties that we've received as a result of a survey in preparation for this meeting today from other counties. In terms of Wicomico County, we're a relatively small county, approximately 100,000 residents. We operate 39 parks. And like most other places, we've experienced a tremendous increase in the use of our parks and our outdoor facilities. Over the last couple of years, our estimated usage of park facilities has increased by around 33%. We see that in statistics as far as our pavilion rentals and facility rentals, but also in terms of the volume of trash and park visitations and that type of metric. So that's a good thing, and that's why we exist. We want people to be in the parks, and so we're thrilled to have more people in parks. But one of the many challenges that we face is trying to keep up with that demand. In our case, you can go ahead to the next slide, please. In our case, though park usage is up about 33%, in Wicomico County, our park staffing is down about 33%. Two major factors that contribute in our situation. One is the difficulty in finding reliable, qualified part-time help. And I think that's something every industry is experiencing at this time. And so that's a challenge. And then unique to us, and I don't know if it's in other counties, but we have traditionally relied on inmate labor to help in our parks, to help keep our parks clean and pick up trash after events. And since the start of the pandemic, those crews have not been available to us. So we see a large increase in usage, and of course, our staffing has decreased. And so you can do the math on that. The result is a challenge. You can go ahead and advance the slide. What we experience, and we heard similar to the state parks, is we get behind on routine tasks. The grass doesn't stop growing. Things continue to need to be done. At times, the level of service suffers, and then we get caught in that endless cycle of trying to play catch up with aging park facilities and keeping up with facilities, in addition to trying to develop new facilities. So it is certainly a challenge. So that is a very brief perspective from Wycomico County. In terms of other areas in the state, in preparation for the meeting, we did a very brief survey of the other 23 counties and Baltimore City. And we received responses from 11 counties, and I'd be happy to share the results of that survey with you if there's interest. I'll just share a few general observations of the survey results. 100% everyone said that their usage of parks, just like the state parks, has shown tremendous increase. Over 2/3 of the respondents to our survey reported an increase of 25% or more. And on average, it was between 40 and 50% increase of park usage. At the same time, while the park usage is going up in terms of budgets, most budgets have remained flat. It's good that they haven't been cut, but they're certainly not growing to the proportion that the need is there. So on average, of the counties that responded to our survey, budgets grew between around 4 to 5% on average, while usage is significantly more than that. So that again is a challenge. We also asked the other counties to rank their current needs in terms of urgency. You can go ahead and advance the slide, please. So we asked them to rank, go ahead and advance one more, if you could, to rank in terms of urgency. And similar to what we see in Wycomico County, the overcrowding of parks, at least on the county level, hasn't been as big of an issue. We don't necessarily have to close our parks because they're overcrowded. Most of the major issues are related to staffing and funding and just trying to keep up. The number one most urgent need that counties noted was difficulty in staffing and training employees. 73% of the respondents rated this a 5 out of 5 as their most urgent need, just in trying to keep up with staffing. The next two most urgent needs had related to funding, both for operating and capital expenses. In some cases, counties are concerned with just keeping up with aging facilities and trying to maintain what exists, and in other cases, trying to address new facilities, but capital and operating expenses were the next most urgent needs. I will note that in the survey, it ranked quite low as far as we asked about acquisition funding or funding available for acquisition of park facilities, and that was ranked low. But I will note, I think primarily the reason for that is because we have a steady, reliable source of funding through program open space, and there's acquisition funding available. Should that ever change, I think that would change the situation for most of us. But at this time, because that has been a reliable and dedicated source of funding, that was not listed as an urgent need, and I thought that was of some interest. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or provide more information on the local perspective, and again, appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we will be back to you for questions in just a moment. Let's turn to Michael Sanderson, the Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Counties.
Thank you very much, Governor and Commission members. It's my pleasure to join you today, and I want to be brief in my comments and just add a few things that I think will complement what you heard from Mr. Miller and from Mr. Hancock about a local perspective on recreation and parks and so forth. We know this is an essential part of the quality of life that we all seek to deliver to our residents. I want to make 3 quick observations, and some of this will connect back to the presentation you heard last week about sort of nuts and bolts of this whole program. My first observation is about this unusual relationship with the dedication of a piece of the state transfer tax as a centerpiece to fund state parks. And I'll just make the general observation that I think on balance, it's poor public policy and it makes for shaky budgeting to have a dedicated revenue as a principal driver of an operating program like this. I think program open space itself is kind of the exception that proves the rule, because POS, you can scale up the number of projects you do in good times. And you can, in theory, scale down the number of projects you do, particularly on the state side where you're acquiring land and so forth, preserving land in times when the real estate market is hot. There's some logic to that, but when you leave the state parks counting on a piece of a variable revenue that's really out of their control, you end up with volatility in the budgeting process that may be a component of what has gotten us to this point, with concern about stability and overall fund availability for the state parks themselves. I'll abbreviate my second point because I think, Mr. Chair, in one of your points and earlier comments have already illustrated this. Counting on the transfer tax and funds coming through it has been a shaky proposition in recent years, because the state has, I think, under difficult circumstances, needed to divert some of those funds from time to time. The state has been pretty good about making pledges to return those funds and get back on track, but following through and actually doing all those pledges has been tougher to accomplish. That shouldn't be ignored in the conversation we're having about the larger infrastructure, about parks and recreation. And I'll finally just say, as we think about these offerings, particularly the state parks, they're not in the downtown municipal areas, as you heard from Mr. Hancock. In many cases, they are deliberately in out-of-way areas. So when you look at the accessibility through fixed route transit and the like, you frequently will end up wanting. In looking for solutions on that front, I think there's a policy challenge for you all in making recommendations. What we don't want to do is inadvertently create incentives for development and growth in the areas where we want Marylanders to get away from it all, right? The last thing you want is a new hotel and a strip mall out in front of the state park, because that's now accessible by fixed route transit or something of that nature. So finding accessibility without creating perverse incentives, I think, is one of the tricky goals that you all need to take up as part of your mission. But that said, we're happy to contribute information and whatnot to the work of the commission and to your staff. Thank you very much for the time to join you today.
Thank you, Michael. And we'll be back to you in a few minutes with some questions. Let me turn at this point then to Ms. Wendy O'Sullivan, the Superintendent of Chesapeake Bay Office for the National Park Service.
Thank you, Governor and Commissioners, for inviting me to join the panel today. I'm Wendy O'Sullivan, Superintendent of the National Park Service Chesapeake Office. I have been with the NPS for nearly 25 years and have worked at a park level in 3 regions and in our national office, all centered around public-private partnerships. I took on the leadership role for NPS Chesapeake Office 2 years ago, and I'm joining you from my home office in Davidsonville, Maryland, which was once part of the traditional lands of the Piscataway Indians. Next slide. The National Park Service has several key roles related to the Chesapeake. First, there are 58 units of the National Park Service within the Chesapeake watershed, including 18 national park sites and several national trails right here in Maryland. If you go to nps.gov/MD, that site is dedicated to everything about the National Park Service in Maryland. In addition, the NPS is a leading partner under the Chesapeake Bay program, and my office also founded the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership, which we continue to co-convene with the Chesapeake Conservancy, one of our primary partners. But the central program that my office manages is the congressionally created Chesapeake Gateways and Water Trails Network and Assistance Program. Over the past 20 years under the Chesapeake Gateways program, the NPS has invested over $30 million across the watershed, including $13 million for Maryland projects, programs, and organizations, all with a very strong focus on conservation, public access, storytelling, and youth employment. Next slide. I have 2 topics for the Commission to consider today: land conservation and visitor experience. Next slide. I'll start with land conservation. This chart shows that in Maryland, privately owned conserved lands represent your largest share of acres of protected lands. While protected private lands are absolutely key to meeting overall conservation goals for the Bay, the Commission should consider ways to expand the benefits of land conservation to include more public access opportunities in Maryland. Next slide. By comparison, in Pennsylvania, the protected lands within the Chesapeake watershed include predominantly state protected lands, which includes state forests, state parks, historic sites, state wildlife management areas, and reservoirs. And you can just see the difference between the two charts. Next slide. So one of my questions that I posed to the Commission is to get a sense if you've discussed setting a 30 by 30 goal for Maryland. 30 by 30 is a national and global movement to conserve 30% of lands and water by 2030. The need is evident, and the many benefits are listed here. And to be clear, 30 by 30 is not just about nature, it's about all of us. It's about people, important places, and spaces to grow, work, and thrive. Maryland could be a leader in 30 by 30 by setting a target with a focus on equitable access and community resilience. And related to the acres chart I showed just 2 slides ago, for Maryland, I would really urge the Commission to look closely at the existing lands that have been protected with public funds to identify those that are not meeting their original intent to provide public access, learning, and enjoyment. They are out there. We should find them and work to bring them into public enjoyment. And I also urge the Commission to consider opportunities to partner with private landowners. Since your numbers are so high for private conservation, it would be important to get a sense of private landowners that are interested in providing more or new public access. Next slide. The visitor experience is the other key topic I'll share with you today. It is about how people physically move throughout a park, how they feel and think about a space, what they do and use while in a park, and how they perceive their experiences. These are just some of the considerations to ensure high quality visitor experience. And I'll run through just a quick overview of some of those. Next slide. When we think about whether a park is welcoming and able to provide quality visitor experience, we need to really truly understand and address inclusion and equity. This graphic from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation helps show the distinction between equality and equity in a very clear and simple way. It's important to engage your existing visitors and the broader community in identifying the range of equity issues to address. One area that MPS is rethinking are our visitor centers. Are they something different in the future based on visitor trends, interests, and needs? We are also expanding our social science research and assessments on capacity and use for our parks. And you can go to nps.gov/social science to really delve into the current and past research that the MPS has done in this space that may help Maryland as you move forward. Next slide. Another important question for all public lands to ask is, do our communities and visitors see themselves in our permanent park staff? This is an example of a recent MPS recruitment campaign to build a more diverse and representative workforce. I'll just leave it here for a second because there's some importance here about how it's being displayed, how it's being shown. Okay, next slide. And the successful bilingual ranger program at Sandy Point that my office funds and runs in partnership with the Chesapeake Conservancy and the Maryland Park Service is a model to build on. We need to find ways to bring these efforts to scale, to make them sustainable and make the changes from within. That picture we saw of, 200 youth going through the summer program, are they actually coming into our workforce, or are they just with us for those periods of time? Those are questions to figure out and work from within on. Next slide. Another key question to ask and answer are your projects and programs addressing priority needs, and are they relevant? Targeted and authentic partnerships are key. Shown here are a few examples of new partnerships at MPS Chesapeake, including work to identify landscapes and stories important to African Americans, efforts to engage our Latino communities, a partnership to advance historic trades, and new collaboration to bring expertise and innovation for more equitable and sustainable transportation and access forward. How could these or similar partnerships support the work of the Commission and advance Maryland's planning? And I think we would all agree that any park infrastructure investment should include sustainable, bay-friendly, and heritage-supporting facilities with modern utilities that are powered by renewable energy wherever possible. Next slide. But please also commit to purposefully invest in your digital infrastructure. Digital communication systems and platforms are often overlooked, but they are critical to visitor experience and broad engagement. MPS upgraded our website, mps.gov, in 2016 as part of our centennial. And recently we launched a new MPS app for people to find and connect with all MPS parks across the country. These investments and efforts have significantly improved public communications and engagement, and simple things as trip planning to help address this bump that we are having with visitation that we're all experiencing. Next slide. While there are many other topics to cover, like a deeper dive on climate resilience and also heritage, for today, I urge the Commission to commit to advancing land conservation and improving key elements of visitor experience with a very purposeful focus on community, equity, and access, because this is really what it's all about, these sorts of images. So thank you for including me in the dialogue, and I look forward to the additional panel sessions that are scheduled later to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. I must also tell you that there are several speakers. The first one that really got into the reference to digital services in terms of making the entire experience the better and having the actual delivery of energy sources to our facilities be non-fossil fueled alternatives. Pleased to hear both of those. I think it's something the Commission ought to pose to the different departments working on this as well. Let me turn to our colleagues and see whether there are questions. And as I think I have the order, it looked to me like Delegate Lutke was first.
Governor, I appreciate it. I was not. Senator Patterson and Delegate Boyce were both ahead of me.
Oh, so it goes in order of the, okay, see, now I've learned one, my grandmother used to say, learn one new thing each day and you're going to be doing okay. And I just learned that, I think because you were center, I saw you first there. But Delegate Patterson, we'll start with you.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair, but I have no questions, so you can just drop the hand there, okay? I'm okay, good, thank you.
Oh, okay, you still had your hand up from the past, okay. Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question. Michael might have answered it, but Scott mentioned it about POS funds often used and not replaced. Do we know the amount and how much technically would be owed back to the fund? Scott? You're on mute, Scott. the line of the
Okay.
year. You're on
Yeah,
mute.
I'm actually going to say that I don't have the answer to that question because this is not a municipal program, goes to the counties, but I bet Michael Sanderson does.
I don't off the top of my head. I think this may have been embedded in the staff presentation you received at the last meeting, but we're glad to work with the staff. I'm sure we can circle back to you all and get to that information.
Okay, and thank you. And then my next question was Wendy mentioning equity. The one thing I hear a lot of, and I hear the chair talking about, outreach, especially as it relates to the Latino community. And I hear a lot about heritage as it relates to the African-American history and experiences. But I'm wondering, you made mention to Native American lands. Are there any within the parks, when we talk about kind of equity and inclusion, any references or historical plaques or teachings regarding any Native American specific lands within parks across the state?
I can't speak directly for the Maryland state parks, but under the National Park Service, we have a national trail that's called the Chesapeake John Smith National Historical Trail. And it is focused on bringing forward the indigenous stories across the Chesapeake. And there are signage, there's waysides, and also an online platform to learn about the indigenous cultures that are within the Chesapeake watershed, with certainly Virginia and Maryland, a significant portion of that. In addition, we have programs that work with our partners in those spaces to listen and learn with the communities. And so we could share more information about those efforts that we have underway with the Park Service.
Thanks. I just want to follow up that question with DNR. Do we have any of those specific either layouts or plaques across our state parks where that would be relevant?
Madam Delegate, I think that is a very important question, and I would ask Andrew if he could coordinate with members from the prior panel and get some detail on that. I would also add that we did have, and I saw a brief reference to it, the program open space funding numbers. And my recollection was that about half of it has been repaid. Another 25% is intended to be repaid on some type of schedule. But the last 25% seems to have disappeared for the moment into a budgetary wasteland. I think, again, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, if you could get those figures and present them to the whole commission, because I can guarantee that this subject will come up repeatedly for the rest of the commission meetings. Delegate, did you have other questions? Delegate Boyce?
I was asking if DNR wanted to speak to the reference of Native American indigenous lands, but if they can send that, or I'm just curious about it.
I think it's an important issue, and obviously addressing your concern, but I think it would be nice to bring that to the attention, a response to the attention of the entire commission as well. Delegate Lukey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. O'Sullivan, I was waiting for you to mention Turkey Tayek's burial site in Piscataway Park, which is I think he was only like the 4th person ever buried in a national park. So a couple questions for the panel. One is, I think we've seen a trend in park management, and particularly in some of the projects that the National Park Service has undertaken, including Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Historic Park, which is a national and a state park unit. The increased emphasis on partnership parks that are jointly managed between different units of government, national and state government, and state and local government. And I guess my question is primarily for Scott and Michael. Is there some ongoing venue for conversations about park development that's done jointly between municipal or county governments and the State Park Service, given that, the needs of the constituents, they don't care who's providing the service?
I don't know that there is a formal conversation, but I do know that the Parks and Recreation leadership in the county level and the municipal level get together on a regular basis and have meetings, and we talk about programs that are ongoing and how we can share resources and things of that nature. Whether there's been anything specific that has come out in any particular county, I can't address that, but I'll certainly check on it, Delegate, and get back to you.
Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
I don't think I have anything much to add. I don't think there's been a structure like this to date, but I don't think that precludes this being something fruitful to potentially pursue.
So second question, Mr. Sullivan mentioned, and I agree completely. First of all, the update to the National Park Service website was great. I'd love to see significant investment in the state's website. I think we've got a lot of great park units. It's a little hard to find information on them sometimes, but that's a larger issue with our state websites. It's not DNR's fault, I don't think. But one of the questions that occurred to me as that was being brought up is that as a park user, it doesn't really matter to me whether I'm going to a county park or state park or national park, except that, I have to figure out which annual pass to carry with me. But is there any effort to provide the sort of, trip planning things that Ms. O'Sullivan was talking about through the National Park Service, but regardless of what unit of government is providing the recreational opportunity? Or in other words, is there a plan for a website I can go to and say, I want to go to a park, I don't care who runs it, and get the information I need?
I'm glad you asked. Because the program, the Chesapeake Gateways program, which really is this effort to knit together, there are 300 sites within the watershed that knit together what makes the Chesapeake special. And they're at every level. Every state park in the 7 jurisdictions of the watershed are listed, all the national parks, many of the local signature places are also listed, including historic, maritime centers and historic ports. And so we have an existing site that's called findyourchesapeake.com, where they're all posted. And I am working on bringing some of that, maybe all of that content into the nps.gov platform. The numbers of eyes that go to nps.gov could never match anything that any of us try to do separately. It is millions of eyes that are going to nps.gov. So I'm working with our national web team and my regional team to bring into the platform that is NPS all of the sites that are under the Chesapeake Gateways program. Now, we have to expand a little beyond the watershed to bring in Assateague and some of the places that are outside the watershed for Maryland. But I think we can do that easily.
Right. And then Mr. Chairman, I apologize. One final question, Ms. O'Sullivan, for you in particular, and maybe I want to sit down and pick your brain on all sorts of things. But one of the questions that occurred to me when you were discussing the Park Service's efforts to interpret the cultural history of particularly minority groups within the U.S. Was that despite the fact that I think people don't know quite how big the footprint is of the National Park Service in Maryland and the number of sites, but Baltimore, our largest city, only has one NPS site that I know of, Fort McHenry, which is a fantastic facility. And unlike other significant East Coast cities, New York, Boston, Philly, Richmond, we don't have any NPS sites in the city that have to do with Black history. Despite plenty of opportunity, right? Frederick Douglass worked in the shipyards there, and you've got, all these great musicians. I mean, the musical history of the U.S. is rooted in Baltimore. Are there any discussions of expanding cultural, historical opportunities, national historic sites, national monuments within the city?
There's in the National Park Service to consider adding something to the National Park System. We do a process that's called a special resource study. And so there is a special resource study that is underway in Baltimore right now for, oh my gosh, I'm about to forget. Supreme Court Justice from Baltimore.
Thurgood Marshall.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. There is a special resource study underway to look at several sites that link to the early life of Thurgood Marshall in Baltimore. So I think we're all waiting to hear what the findings are of that. And the basic parameters look at, is it nationally significant? That's easy to check mark, right? And then it looks at criteria for inclusion. And there's a set standard of questions to bring something into the National Park System. And there are times where there's not enough historic fabric left, for example, or it doesn't knit together and doesn't have enough sort of basis for the MPS to be the right caretaker to step in. Maybe it really should be a state park or some other caretaker, steward of the property. So we're waiting on the findings of that study. I am not aware of any other what are called special resource studies right now. Typically how a special resource study happens is it is requested of the National Park Service from a member of Congress. And so that's how they occur. For example, we've done 2 special resource studies for the Chesapeake itself to come into the National Park System, some version of the Chesapeake being honored. And those 2 special resource studies found that it was nationally significant and that it met all the criteria.
I think we'd all be supportive of a Chesapeake National Recreation Area. So, but I want you to know that every single legislator on the call was just nodding and about to write emails to their congressman to ask for more studies. So appreciate that.
Senator Zucker, before I give you one quick question, observation to Ms. O'Sullivan. The reference to the linking of the websites, I think is extraordinarily important because as Scott Hancock indicated and sometimes forgotten, the economic development aspect of a really strong park system, and to be able to take some very unique parks that we have in our counties and our cities and all of a sudden open them up to an audience of tens of millions is bound to lead to increased tourism and participation. So we think that is great, and personally would recommend that we try, maybe not through this commission, but somehow or other, to get the 2 programs working together so that it can be statewide as well. Ours is not quite as primitive as may think. I personally enjoy when I go on and look for the local parks, because we use them fairly regularly. It automatically says, given on the time, whether it's open or closed. It may seem minor, but if you're not sure of that, it is important to us. One little minor thing. Senator Zucker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On the information technology piece. So, Mrs. Sullivan, thank you for that presentation. So you heard the previous panel talk about overcrowding, we reach our capacity limits and close down. And I noticed that you showed a presentation quickly on your mobile app. Does the mobile app that you have give an indication that if there's a certain capacity issue within your park, and then give people options of what's nearby?
Well, certainly the mapping feature does give, you put in your zip code and it gives you everything that's within a certain distance of you. So that's a great feature. But they're working right now to add live information on capacity issues at parks, so that the app will actually let you know live if parking lots are full or if they're at capacity. So that's a feature that will dramatically improve the app.
Because that would be great if we can get that obviously system wide, where we can give people the information that their local park is open, their municipal park's open. But all right, well, I know DNR is taking note on this.
Thank you. Do any other commission members have questions? Let me ask a couple of very quick ones, and if it's a complicated answer, we can get back to it in writing subsequently. But Scott Hancock, let me ask you, as I understand it, there were 65.5 million approved expenditures from program open space this year. And did I understand your comments correctly? Of that, only 5 million went to non-Baltimore City municipalities?
No, sir. I was taught with a 5 billion reference, the Parks and Playgrounds program, which is a separate program, a small grant program, and that is specific to municipalities. It's only municipalities eligible for that program. I don't have the numbers, and I would have to do a lot of research to figure out how much of the POS funding actually was directed from a specific county to a municipality in that county.
Sure. I thought that figure sounded awful low, and okay, so I'm glad to hear that it's not that. And we don't expect you to do that type of research, but maybe our staff could coordinate with the department and see. Presumably they should be able to have that very readily available. Let me also ask Michael Sanderson, on the pandemic use of the parks, is the local parks greater impact from pandemic than the state parks were? And the reason I'm asking, I'm trying to think it through a little bit. The pandemic, the whole idea was, of course, people couldn't go to the normal places they go to recreate, but there is a park, a swimming pool, whatever it might be, a baseball field, right down the street. And I was thinking, if the state parks were impacted that much, do either you or Scott have some idea of how often city and county, and we should have Maryland Park and Planning Commission in this as well, were actually closed because of overcrowding during the pandemic?
Governor, I'll take a first stab at that. I really think Mr. Miller from the Park and Rec affiliate of the county governments, in advance of today's discussion, reached out to his counterparts running the local parks and so forth. So that was one of the slides that you heard earlier. He may be able to share more detail. We certainly saw a big uptake in participation, both metered and unmetered, in all these recreational activities. I don't know if we had the closure of facilities at the county level of the same magnitude that the states had to, but I think that may be the nature of their setup rather than the growth in participation. But I'd be inclined to defer to Steve Miller for any further thoughts there. Steve?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think the challenges we experienced, I think were similar to the state parks, but I think as far as park closures, I think theirs was a little more unique. I'm not aware of that being as big an issue in the county parks as far as turning people away and shutting parks down.
Steve, while you're here and speaking, a quick question. Is the staffing, lower staffing level, a matter of available funds for the county, or I'll ask the same thing for the state agencies, or is it a question of available job seekers? I'm seeing a lot of news in the various business publications recently that the pay scales, for example, for daycare, child care centers is so low that they're not able to recruit people. And I'm wondering if the same thing is here, and particularly with a large number of part-time. Is this a question of available money to the hiring agency, or is it a question of not a pool of qualified applicants out there?
I would say yes to both, and I think it's a valid point to mention the pay scales. I think it's difficult to find people that are willing to work. Like in our situation, we typically run 8 after-school sites in the fall. Right now, we're running 4 because we simply don't have the staff to operate those facilities. So I think the availability of people is certainly an issue, but I also think the funding and the level that we're able to pay, they can find better rates elsewhere. And so that makes it much more challenging to find qualified staff.
I suspect by reading, nothing to do with our commission, but different business journals and things like that, that is a challenge for us as well, the pay scale and the availability. So we're almost out of time. So one last quick question for me, and then I'll go back to the commission. But
Governor,
yes.
Just to follow up on that question, I think it might be interesting to get some numbers on staffing from the NPS side. You know, some of our parks are equivalent in sort of size and type of resource right here in sort of Metro DC Baltimore, because I was a little stunned by how low the numbers are on the state park side. I mean, just to get a sense, I texted quick my friend who's the superintendent of Anacostia Park, and they manage also some of the historic homes like Frederick Douglass and Mary McLeod Bethune. She has 240 employees just for that, you know, small collection of parks. So it might be helpful to get a sense on the staffing issue by doing some pulling some numbers from the National Park Service.
Exactly. I was going to ask you one last question to get right about out of time. So if you could respond to us in writing, I'm very interested in what kind of tools you would recommend to encourage the public use of privately conserved land. And I'm assuming this incentive, I'm assuming that some of the enforced in the existing agreements, but we'd like to know some of the things that you found that work.
I mean, certainly, you know, on the partnership side, you know, providing some opportunities where the investments for sort of basic access are engaged. You know, does a site need some volunteers to come in to do some trail work or some investment there that, you know, the individual landowner wouldn't necessarily do on their own? You know, all the way up to, you know, putting in a dock. I think one of the areas that we've started to look at right in Annapolis is thinking about investments that can be matched with liability insurance coverage. So, you know, really looking at how public spaces can be opened on private lands if you have assurance that your liability is covered. And there's been some research there, and we can work with the city of Annapolis staff that have pulled some really good information together about that.
Great. Thank you very much. And let me thank all of our panelists. We appreciate it very much. And I certainly appreciate your following up on some of these questions in a timely manner so we can distribute them to all of our commission members. Thank you all very much. Let me turn to the commission overall now. In the last couple of minutes that we have left here, first of all, is there any, from the commission members, any general question, observation, discussion point that you would like to make at this time? Hearing none, then let me just move at this point to a couple quick reminders. Number one, that our next meeting is October 5th, but please keep in mind, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's panel, that this one only, the meeting time has changed, and it will be from 10 to 12 in the morning. And then also for the general public, let me remind you that we welcome your written comments. We welcome follow-up to this meeting, and certainly for the third meeting, they'll be coming up on the 5th. I believe on our website, you'll find the two email addresses for Jeremy Baker and Andrew Gray. So if you can just touch base with them, and they'll make sure that the comments get to us and all as well. Any other questions, comments, personal protest, anything like that at this time? Well, hearing none, I want to tell you this may well be a record, because unless someone's fooling with the time clock, it's exactly 4 o'clock and we are on schedule here as well. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your input. Bye-bye.
Thank you.